There's a guy in every office. You know the one. He's been there 11 years. He knows where the good pens are. He remembers when the coffee machine was better. He trained 3 people who are now his managers, and every 6 months HR tells him he's on the right track. He nods. He goes back to his desk. He sends 17 emails. He closes 2 browser tabs. He is on track. On track to what exactly? Nobody's asked that. Nobody's said. And here's the thing. He stopped asking somewhere around year 4. Now multiply that guy by about 40 million people across the United States alone, and you start to understand why something very strange is happening with Gen Z in the labor market right now. They're not lazy. They're not entitled. They're not terminally online or allergic to effort. They're doing something much more precise. They're refusing to pretend because at some point in the last 3 or 4 years, a generation looked at the system, did a rough calculation, checked the numbers against the pitch, and came back with a very specific conclusion. The math doesn't work. The promise was never real, and waiting for it is the most expensive thing you can do with a decade of your life. Is the question, what does it mean when an entire generation looks at the corporate escalator, watches where it actually goes, and starts getting off before the doors even close? We're going to explain how the corporate promotion system actually works, and why it's getting weird. Not weird like kids these days weird. Weird like structurally broken, incentive misaligned, mathematically irrational weird. I'm going to show you the machine underneath the machine, the one that was never explained in onboarding, the one they assume you'll be too polite or too comfortable to go looking for on your own. I'll show you why the system rewards certain behaviors that have almost nothing to do with performance. Why Gen Z is the first generation to clock this at scale and early enough to do something about it, and why that's either the most important economic shift in decades or the most expensive mistake a generation can make, depending entirely on what they do next. One metaphor for this entire video, the corporate escalator. You step on, it moves you upward automatically. No real effort required. Sounds good, except it only goes to one floor, a floor that was decided before you were hired. And here's the part that nobody mentions on day one. The people at the top didn't take the escalator. They built a different machine entirely. The escalator is for people who believe the escalator is the only option. Let's talk about what's actually going on. The average corporate salary increase for a high performer in the United States in 2025 was somewhere around 3.8%. Inflation the same year was sitting between 3 and 4%. So, if you were the best person on your team, the one your manager mentions in their own performance reviews as evidence of their leadership ability, the one who stayed late and delivered and volunteered for the project nobody else wanted, your reward was a raise that roughly covered the cost of existing. Congratulations, you stayed still. Now, here's the part that starts to sting with slightly more precision. The average salary increase when you leave a company and accept an offer elsewhere historically somewhere between 10 and 22%, sometimes level of skill, the same measurable output, just a different logo on your building pass. The market pays you more for leaving than your current employer pays you for staying. The system is literally taxing loyalty. It's not punishing bad performers. It's punishing the people who believed the pitch the hardest. Think about what that actually means at the human level. A 24-year-old who job hops every 2 years and negotiates hard at each transition versus a 24-year-old who stays loyal to one employer for 6 years and absorbs 2 standard annual raises. By 30, the first person is probably earning $40,000 to $50,000 more per year. Not because they worked harder, not because their ideas are better, not because they have some extraordinary insight the second person lacks, because they read the incentive structure correctly and responded to it. That's it. That's the entire difference. And Gen Z figured this out very fast, faster than any generation before them. Partly because they watched their parents get restructured out after 18 years of loyalty and discovered that no one from the company came to the retirement party that never happened. Partly because salary data became weirdly almost aggressively transparent. Glassdoor, LinkedIn, Reddit threads where someone casually drops their TC with more detail than most people share with their own families. Partly because someone posted a pay stub and everyone in the comments section realized the quiet one who left 2 years ago is making $30,000 more for the same work. The escalator goes up, yes, but slowly. And it stops at a floor that was pre-selected by people who have never met you. Now, here's what I want you to understand about how promotions actually function. Most people operate with a mental model that looks roughly like this. You perform well, someone notices, they reward you with more responsibility and more money because that's how merit works, and merit is supposed to get rewarded. That's the story. That's the version on the company's career page under the heading "We invest in our people." The actual version is different and more mechanical. A promotion happens when a company has a structural problem, a gap in a team, a scope that needs coverage, a reporting line that's broken, and you happen to be the cheapest, lowest risk, most convenient solution to that problem that is currently available. It is not primarily a reward. It is primarily a procurement decision. The decision just happens to benefit you as a side effect, which is why it feels personal when it isn't. Your manager is not waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning thinking about your career trajectory. Your manager is thinking about their deliverables, their headcount approvals, the conversation they have to avoid with their VP, and whether the quarterly numbers are going to require another round of resource optimization, which is what companies call laying people off when they want to sound formal about it. When your manager says you're almost ready, what they're often actually saying is one of a few things. They might be saying, "I don't have budget approval yet and won't until the fiscal cycle resets." They might be saying, "I need you in your current role for another 6 months before I can restructure the team without it looking like I was understaffed." Or, and this one is the most honest version that nobody ever says out loud, "If I promote you, I have to backfill your role, and finding, hiring, and onboarding someone new is 3 months of friction I don't want right now, so let's revisit this in Q3. Q3 never saves anyone. Q3 just becomes Q1 of the following year. There's a dynamic in organizational psychology sometimes called role entrenchment. The better you are at your current job, the harder you are to move. Your competence becomes a ceiling. The company's incentive is to keep you producing in the role you've mastered, not to invest in transitioning you to a new one where you'll be less immediately useful for 6 to 12 months. So, paradoxically, excelling at the wrong level keeps you at the wrong level. And here's the mathematical flaw under all of this. In most corporate org charts, the ratio of individual contributors to management roles is somewhere between 8 and 12 to 1, which means at any given moment, the majority of people waiting for a promotion cannot get one. Not because they're underperforming, not because they're being overlooked by a bad manager, because the org chart simply doesn't have room for them at the next level. The escalator was built with a very specific capacity. 1 person per floor, and the floors above you are already occupied by people who aren't going anywhere because they're doing the same calculation about the floor above them. Gen Z is the first generation to say this out loud in large numbers and have the cultural infrastructure to make it spread. The response from a significant portion of older professionals has been predictable and interesting. You just have to pay your dues. Patience is a virtue. That's not how the real world works. You need to earn it, which is interesting, because patience is a financial strategy. And like all financial strategies, it needs to be evaluated against alternatives. Waiting 3 years for a promotion that bumps your salary from $62,000 to $76,000 is a certain kind of decision, but you need to measure what it cost. 3 years of opportunity cost. 3 years where your skills remained narrow and your network stayed internal. 3 years where you didn't start the side project, didn't take the contract, didn't test the alternative. 3 years of compounding that didn't begin. The promotion feels like a gain because the number goes up. But the relevant question is, gain compared to what? By the way, if you're finding this useful, this channel is specifically about how money and systems actually work as opposed to how we're told they work. If that distinction is the kind of thing you want to keep thinking about, subscribing makes logical sense. Let's go a level deeper because the math is almost the easy part. The more interesting question is, if the numbers are this accessible, if the logic is this clear, why do tens of millions of educated rational people stay on the escalator anyway? This is the part one find genuinely fascinating from a behavioral standpoint. Sunk cost is the obvious answer and is too simple. You spent 3 years at a company, you're reluctant to leave because of those 3 years, even though those 3 years are functionally gone regardless of what you do next. Classic bias, textbook. But sunk cost alone doesn't explain the depth of how stuck people get. There's something else operating underneath it, something more persistent and more specifically human. Identity fusion. Here's how it works in practice. You join a company, you're competent, people recognize that competence. Over time, that recognition layers into your sense of self. You become the person who runs the analytics here, the one they call when the server is down, the one who knows the history of the account nobody else understands. That recognition feels good in a way that goes beyond professional satisfaction. It becomes social infrastructure. You have a role, you have visibility, you have a place. Now leaving isn't just a career calculation, it's an identity dismantlement. You go from being the known, recognized, respected one to being the new hire who doesn't know where the bathrooms are and hasn't been invited to the unofficial Slack channel yet. Your brain does not treat this as neutral. Psychologically, losing a clear social role registers as a genuine threat, and the response to threat is typically not rational analysis, it's avoidance. So people stay not because the promotion is actually coming, not because the math checks out, but because staying protects a version of themselves they've come to rely on, and that is not weakness. That is baseline human psychology operating exactly as designed under social conditions. The problem is that large organizations understand this perfectly, not through some explicit strategic memo, not with a slide in the executive deck that says exploit psychological attachment to reduce voluntary attrition. They understand it structurally, the way a river understands the path of least resistance. The longer you stay, the more your professional network concentrates inside the company, the more your skills are calibrated to the company's specific internal systems, the more the outside market feels abstract and vaguely threatening, the more leaving feels like starting over rather than moving forward. This is why culture is something companies invest in heavily. A strong internal culture isn't purely about collaboration or creativity or any of the things it's described as in the company all hands. A strong internal culture is functionally a retention mechanism. It makes the company feel like a place you belong rather than a place you work, and belonging is extremely difficult to walk away from. Now, here's the reversal. You think the problem is that you lack ambition. You think you just need to push harder, advocate more, be more visible, demonstrate more value, but that's not actually the problem. The problem is that your ambition has been successfully captured and redirected toward goals that primarily serve the system rather than you. Your desire to advance, to be recognized, to be seen as capable and growing, those are legitimate real drives. The escalator just routes them into its own architecture. Work harder to earn the next title. Get the title to unlock a small salary increase. Use the increase to justify the next 2 years of investment. Repeat until retirement or restructuring, whichever comes first. It is a beautifully designed machine if you are the one who built it. It is an extremely expensive machine if you are the one riding it without understanding where it goes. Gen Z's data on this is becoming hard to ignore. Average tenure of a Gen Z employee in 2025 was somewhere around 2 years and a few months. Their parents, the same measurement, closer to 5. The automatic response from a lot of commentators has been no loyalty, no work ethic, no commitment. My read is different. Faster feedback loops, lower sunk costs before they accumulate, a realistic early assessment of the incentive structure. The same behavior, a completely different interpretation, and the interpretation you choose determines what you think the solution is. Now, here's where I need to be honest with you, because this is the part that a lot of content in this space completely avoids. And avoiding it is basically negligent. Gen Z correctly identifying that the corporate escalator isn't going where it claimed to go is only smart if they replace it with something that actually works better. And a meaningful percentage of them are not doing that. They're leaving the escalator and standing in the lobby staring at their phone, which is not a strategy. That's just a different kind of stuck with better lighting. There are 3 paths I see people actually taking when they bail on the corporate promotion game. Only one of them moves the financial needle. Path 1, leave, go freelance, make roughly the same money with no benefits, no structure, and the psychological chaos of variable income and 0 colleagues. Is this better in some ways? Sometimes. Is it a wealth-building mechanism? Usually not. Most people who go this route are self-employed individuals with one main client they're slightly scared of losing. They traded a manager they disliked for a market they don't understand. The freedom is real. The income ceiling is also real. And the ceiling is lower than they expected because they're trading time for money the same as before, just with fewer vacation days. Path 2, stay in the job, psychologically check out, and deliver exactly the minimum described in the job posting. You know this by the name quiet quitting, though that phrase has been so thoroughly chewed up by media coverage that it's basically meaningless now. The logic isn't stupid as a short-term energy management move, but as a financial position it is completely inert. You're still on the escalator. You're just riding it with your arms crossed. Floor 5 is still floor 5. Path 3, stay in or leave the corporate track and deliberately redirect energy and capital toward building assets, equity, or leverage. This is the path that actually changes the underlying math. This is the one worth understanding in detail. Let me give you a concrete scenario. I'll use round numbers and a realistic timeline because vague financial advice is just vibes with a thumbnail. 2 people, both 24 years old, both starting at $62,000 a year in moderately skilled knowledge work. I'll call them Person A and Person B because I'm not trying to win any awards for character naming here. Person A does everything that the old playbook recommends. Shows up reliably, delivers above average work, advocates for themselves at review time, gets genuinely good feedback. At year 3, they're promoted to a senior role. Salary moves to $79,000. At year 6, another step up, salary at $94,000. They invest modestly, contribute to their 401k, hit their match, occasionally put a few $100s into an index fund when they remember. By 30, they're earning close to $100,000 a year. Their net worth might be somewhere around $80,000 to $90,000 including retirement savings. They feel like they're doing all right. And objectively, in isolation, they are doing reasonably well. They are also one restructuring announcement away from restarting this process entirely at market where their skills have only been tested in one context. Person B starts the same job, delivers competent work, not devotional work. Spends their evenings and weekends over the first 12 months doing something specific, learning paid digital advertising. Not casually, systematically. Free resources, cheap courses, practice on a small personal project, studying actual campaigns, learning what the metrics actually mean. After 12 months, they land their first external client. $800 for a 1-month engagement is not impressive by anyone's financial standard. They stay at their job. By month 18, Person B has 3 clients, $4,000 a month coming in additional to salary. At the 24-month mark, they make a lateral move to a new employer, same industry, different company, and negotiate the switch to land a $74,000 base. They're now bringing in over $120,000 in combined income. They do not quit their job. They let the business grow. At month 30, they're billing $9,000 a month on the side. They hire a freelancer for $2,000 a month to handle execution on client accounts. They are now running a small but real operation, one that generates revenue when they're asleep, when they're on vacation, when they're doing literally anything else. They're still employed. They've added a lever. At year 4, they step off employment entirely. The business is generating between $12,000 and $16,000 a month with real consistency. They take 40% of that and route it into a consistent investment program, broad index exposure, one small real estate position, some equity in a client's business in exchange for discounted services, a deal most employees never have the leverage to make. By 30, Person B has a cash flow in business and growing portfolio and no dependence on any single entity's quarterly budget decisions for their financial survival. The gap here is not talent. Person A might be the more naturally talented person in the conventional sense. The gap is structural. One person waited for the escalator to go faster. One person built a lever and the lever doesn't care about your performance review score or whether your skip level manager knows your name. Here's a thing I want to make clear before I continue because there's a version of this argument that slides into easy cynicism and I think easy cynicism is almost as useless as naive idealism. I am not saying companies are predatory. I'm not saying your manager is running a scheme against you. I'm not doing the anti-corporate media angle where capitalism is bad and your employer is the villain. That's emotionally satisfying and strategically useless. It also misses the actual mechanism. Companies built hierarchical promotion structures because for a long time that structure was genuinely the most efficient solution to a real organizational problem. You needed middle management because information moved slowly and needed human nodes to filter and route it. You needed tenure-based advancement because skills genuinely took years to accumulate and there was no external signal for capability, no verifiable way to tell if someone who'd been somewhere 3 years was more valuable than someone who'd been somewhere 1 year. You needed loyalty incentives because talent markets were local, opaque, and slow. The structure made sense. It wasn't a conspiracy. It was an engineering solution to a real coordination problem. That was true in 1978, genuinely true for the conditions that existed then. Then several things shifted simultaneously and the structure did not update at the same pace. This is the part that matters. First, information became nearly free. In 1990, if you wanted to know your market value, you had to know someone at another company or engage a recruiter or make a move and see what offer came back. That process took months and required significant social capital. Now it takes 30 minutes on LinkedIn, a couple of Glassdoor lookups, and a Reddit thread from someone who works at the exact company you're curious about posting their total comp breakdown in voluntary detail. The opacity that made loyalty financially rational has essentially evaporated. Second, skill acquisition became dramatically faster. In 1992, becoming a credible financial analyst required years of formal education, a specific credential path, and on-the-job experience that was genuinely difficult to replicate outside of institutional settings. In 2025, you can develop a demonstrable, monetizable skill in 12 to 18 months with a combination of structured online learning, deliberate practice on real projects, and the kind of portfolio building that wasn't remotely possible when your only evidence was a paper resume. The slow accumulation model that justified patience has been accelerated almost out of recognition. Third, the implicit contract broke. This is the one that I think is most underrated in understanding why this entire shift is happening. Before roughly 2008 and more specifically before the financial crisis made mass layoffs a standard and uncontroversial corporate tool, there was an implicit deal in employment. It was never written down, never formalized, never encoded in any document you signed, but it was functionally real for a large portion of the workforce. The deal was, you give us loyalty, consistent performance, and your discretionary effort, and we give you job security, a pension, predictable career progression, and some version of a dignified exit when you're ready for it. That deal existed. It was imperfect. It was more available to some demographics than others, but it was sufficiently real that it made the logic of staying and waiting and investing in one employer made genuine sense as a financial strategy. After 2008, companies discovered something they had suspected but never fully tested at scale. Mass layoffs work. You can remove 30% of your workforce and your stock price goes up. The market rewards a certain kind of efficiency signal much more than it rewards workforce stability. Shareholders benefit from restructuring. The incentive for executives is therefore to restructure when the math calls for it, regardless of what the implicit promise was. By the time Gen Z entered the labor market, roughly 2019 onward with the pandemic immediately adding another layer of chaos, the implicit contract was not dying, it was gone. But the language around it hadn't updated. Companies still ran careers pages that talked about growth and investment and belonging. The verbiage was unchanged. The substance had been quietly renegotiated without anyone informing the people entering the agreement. So Gen Z walks into an employment system that still speaks the old language but operates on completely different terms, and a significant fraction of them can smell the gap between the two. They look at the colleague who got restructured out after 16 years and left with a 60-day severance and a LinkedIn post about exciting new chapters. They look at the 401k that replaced the pension that replaced the actual retirement security that existed 2 generations ago. They look at the "We're a family" line on slide 3 of the onboarding deck and a restructuring announcement 8 months later, and they make an inference, a rational data-driven inference. The game has changed. The rules they're being taught in performance reviews and manager one-on-ones are the old rules, and playing old rules in a new game doesn't just fail to work, it actively measurably costs you. Now here's a nuance I don't want to skip past because I think it's where the realistic version of this conversation has to go. Let's say you've absorbed everything so far. You understand the incentive structure. You're not going to naively wait for a promotion that the org chart literally doesn't have room for. You're not going to let your ambition get captured and redirected. Smart. Correct, Red. But here's the trap that catches people right after they get the insight. Understanding the problem is not the same as solving it. And the error I see most commonly is this. People disengage from the corporate system correctly, and then they redirect their energy into lifestyle rather than assets. Shorter hours, better work-life balance, more experiences, nicer weekends. And I'm not here to make a moral argument about any of that. That's your time and you decide what you do with it. But I want to be mechanically precise. Leisure is consumption. It is not an asset. It does not compound. It does not produce income while you sleep. Taking energy away from the corporate escalator and redirecting it into personal enjoyment is a different allocation of your finite time, but it does not improve your financial position. The previous generation overinvested in the corporate system. That was a real mistake with real consequences. The risk for this generation is the opposite error. Correctly identifying that the old path is broken and then failing to build a new one. Trading the illusion of the promotion for the illusion of freedom. Both are illusions if the underlying financial position doesn't change. Real freedom, the kind that is financially durable rather than emotionally satisfying in the short term, requires assets. Actual assets. Things that produce income or accumulate value independent of your daily presence. Equity in something, ownership of something, skills that translate to leverage rather than just employment. Here is the 3-level framework I use for thinking about where someone actually is financially, regardless of age, income, or lifestyle. Level 1, you own your time, but someone else owns your output. You work, they pay you. You stop working, the money stops. This is most employees. It is also most freelancers if we're being honest with the numbers. High personal agency, minimal structural leverage. The escalator is level 1. A slower, less controllable version of level 1, but level 1. Level 2, you have income streams that are at least partially decoupled from your direct time input. A business with systems or employees. A rental property that cash flows. A portfolio large enough that dividends or market returns are meaningfully supplementing income on a monthly basis. You work less linearly. Some income happens while you are doing other things. This is where financial leverage actually begins. This is where the compounding dynamic starts to matter in a way you can feel. Level 3, your assets generate enough to cover your cost of living with meaningful margin, and you work on things because they interest you rather than because you need the income to survive. Most people call this financial independence. I think that phrase has been so associated with early retirement content that it carries the wrong connotation. It's not about not working. It's about optionality, the ability to say no to things you don't want without financial consequences. The vast majority of people, Gen Z or otherwise, are at level 1. Correctly leaving the corporate escalator does not automatically move you to level 2. Freelancing is still mostly level 1 with more calendar control. Quiet quitting is level 1 with a worse relationship with your manager. Moving to level 2 requires something the escalator never taught you to do. Build something that works while you're not working. And that is a completely different skill set from being good at a job. It requires thinking about income architecture instead of income execution, about systems rather than tasks, about what you own rather than what you do. Here is the timing reality that I think is the most practically important thing in this video, and also the thing people most want to avoid hearing. The best window for building an alternative to the corporate escalator is when you are young, have low fixed costs, high tolerance for income variability, and a long enough runway that early mistakes don't permanently damage your position, which is in practical terms your 20s. The math on this is mechanical and unforgiving. A 22-year-old who spends 2 years building a small business that eventually generates $5,000 a month has a real compounding asset in their mid-20s. Those cash flows have decades to reinvest and compound. The skills, network, and systems they build in that process also compound in ways that are hard to fully price. If that same person waits until they're 35, when they have a mortgage, children, high fixed costs, and a career identity that is calcified over a decade, the decision is exponentially harder and takes significantly longer to execute. Not impossible, but harder in every dimension. This is not intended as a warning for people who are older. It's intended to make a specific point. Gen Z's current skepticism about the corporate track is arriving at exactly the right moment in the life cycle for it to be actionable. The window is open. The question is whether they use it or treat it like a vibe rather than a strategy. The people in genuine structural difficulty are not the 22-year-olds who decided to figure out an alternative. They have time and low costs on their side. The people in the hardest position are those who played the game correctly by the old rules, hit 40 or 45, got restructured out of a senior role, and are now competing in a labor market that's fundamentally repriced their profile. They're not competing with peers. They're competing with younger workers who cost less, require less management, and have more recent technical fluency. They followed the contract faithfully. The contract was quietly voided while they were performing their quarterly reviews. That's not a character failure. That's a systems failure, and naming it as such is important because the instinct to moralize about individual choices obscures the structural design of the problem. What actually builds wealth? Let me stay here for a moment because I've spent most of this video diagnosing the problem, and I want to be useful rather than just comprehensive. The first thing is skill arbitrage. Find a skill that is genuinely valuable in the market that relatively few people can execute at a high level, and that translates directly and measurably to business outcomes. Not general capabilities, not soft skills phrased as competencies, something specific and testable. Growth marketing with verifiable attribution, financial modeling for transactions, regulatory navigation in a niche industry, supply chain optimization in a specific vertical. Pick something narrow enough to be rare, valuable enough to be well compensated, and specific enough that the market can evaluate you independently of who employed you before. The reason this matters beyond the salary upside is leverage. A highly specific, demonstrably valuable skill makes you extractable from your current employer's narrative. You stop being one of our people with high potential, a phrase that means nothing and commits to nothing, and start being someone the market actively wants. That is a different posture. It changes how you negotiate. It changes how you think about your alternatives. It changes the minimum you're willing to accept. The second is income architecture. Most people operate on a single income stream from a single source. That's not just fragile in the obvious sense of what happens if that source disappears. It's also structurally low leverage because your income ceiling is defined entirely by one entity's willingness to pay you more. The goal isn't to have 12 income streams simultaneously, which is how this advice usually gets butchered. The goal is to add one additional stream that is genuinely independent of your primary employer. One client, one product, one asset. Even if it generates $1,000 or $2,000 a month at first, it changes your psychology in a way that is financially meaningful beyond the number itself. You are no longer entirely dependent on one organization's quarterly budget to define your market value. That changes your negotiating posture. It changes your risk tolerance. It changes what you'll accept and what you won't. The third is capturing upside before lifestyle absorbs it. This is the most boring thing I'll say in this video, and it is the one that actually determines outcomes over a decade. When income increases, whether from a raise, a bonus, a promotion if you do end up getting one, or a month where the side business does well, the default human response is to upgrade lifestyle in proportion. Bigger place, nicer car, more expensive version of the weekend. The lifestyle responds almost automatically to the income signal. The math on this is devastating when you look at it from a 30-year perspective. $1 spent on lifestyle at 24 is not just $1. It's the compounded value of that dollar over 40 years, which at a 7% average real return is roughly $15. That's not an argument for never spending money. That's an argument for treating the gap between what you earn and what you spend as the most strategically important number in your financial life. More important than your gross income, more important than your investment returns. The gap is where wealth actually forms. People with high incomes and high expenses are not wealthy. They're employed at a high level. There is a meaningful difference between those two things, and conflating them is one of the most expensive mistakes a person can make in their 30s when the income is there but the assets haven't formed yet. One quick thing about what happens at the systems level if enough people actually exit the escalator. I find this genuinely interesting as a second-order question. Companies need talents. They have historically secured talent for a combination of base salary, advancement promises, and the psychological benefits of belonging and institutional identity. If the advancement promise becomes widely understood as unreliable, and the understanding is spreading significantly faster than most companies' HR strategies are evolving, and if enough capable people have sufficient alternatives to act on that understanding, the balance of leverage in the employment relationship shifts. We've already seen the early version of this in some sectors. Wherever the demand for a skill significantly outpaces supply, the escalator gets faster because the alternative is watching people walk off it entirely. Compensation increases, working conditions improve. The game changes not out of corporate benevolence, but because the incentive structure changes. This doesn't apply uniformly across industries. In knowledge work, the shift is already meaningfully underway. In highly regulated professions, in certain trades, in industries with structural barriers to alternative income, the corporate track remains much more difficult to exit meaningfully. The degree of freedom here is not distributed equally, and pretending it is would be dishonest. But for the majority of knowledge workers, which includes a large and growing share of the economy, the leverage is moving. Gen Z is the first generation to collectively exercise at scale. Whether that exercise produces wealth or just lifestyle optionality is still being determined largely by individual choices that are happening right now, in real time, in apartments and home offices and coffee shops across every major city. One last thing before the end. This one is softer, but I think it's the one that actually determines outcomes more than any of the financial mechanics. The corporate escalator, for all of its mathematical flaws, gave people something underrated. A legible social script, a clear answer to the question, what do you do? Senior marketing manager, director of operations, VP of whatever. These titles mean something to people at dinner parties, to family members who want to know you're okay, to the internal narrative you tell yourself when you're deciding if you're succeeding. When you exit the escalator, when you're building something, testing something, running a small consulting practice, investing in assets that haven't become impressive yet, the narrative gets complicated. What do you do? I run a digital marketing consultancy. I have a couple of investments I'm building out. Blank faces, polite nods. The script doesn't map. That social ambiguity is genuinely costly, and almost no one who gives financial advice accounts for it correctly, especially in your 20s when professional identity is still forming. The psychological cost of operating without a clear social label is real, and a lot of people fold right before the inflection point of their alternative, specifically because they can't tolerate the ambiguity any longer, and the escalator is right there offering a comprehensible narrative in exchange for getting back on. The people who get through that period tend to carry a simple internal frame. I am building something. The current state of it is not the measure of me. The trajectory is the measure. That reframe is simple to state and difficult to maintain against consistent social pressure, but it is learnable, and it matters more than most tactical advice. Let me bring this back to where we started. The guy in the office, year 11, knows where the good pens are. Every 6 months, on the right track. He is not stupid. He is not a failure. He made a rational bet on a system using the information available to him at the time in a context where the system appeared to be honoring its commitments. He played the game with the rules he was given. The rules changed underneath him. He didn't adjust because the adjustment costs were always just slightly higher than the sunk costs of staying. And here he is at year 11 on the right track to exactly floor 5. That is the actual story of why Gen Z refuses to pretend the promotion is coming. Not entitlement, not laziness, not a cultural defect or a generational character flaw, a faster, clearer, earlier read of a system that was never designed to make them wealthy. A system that was designed to make them functional, reliable, and compensated just enough above their outside options that leaving never felt quite worth the friction. They saw the escalator, they watched where it goes, they checked the math, and a meaningful number of them are asking whether there's a better machine. The answer is yes, there are better machines, but only if you actually build them. Opting out without building in is not freedom, it is just a different kind of stuck, and one with worse benefits. 3 things to actually do with this, not inspiration, mechanics. 1. Get a precise number. Know exactly what you earn, exactly what you spend, and exactly what the gap is each month. Not approximately, not within a few $100s, exactly. Run the actual number. Most people cannot tell you their monthly cash flow with any precision, and you cannot optimize a system you haven't measured. If you don't know the gap, you don't know whether you're building anything or just consuming with more self-awareness. 2. Identify one specific skill you have that a business outside your current employer would pay market rate for directly. Not your job title, the actual thing you do, the capability that creates measurable value. Then price it at what the market actually charges, not what your salary implies per hour, but what a consultant or freelancer in that space actually bills, and find one client to test it with. You do not need to quit your job to do this, you do not need permission. You need to test the lever once to know if it moves. 3. Before the next income increase hits your account, make the allocation decision in advance. Decide the percentage going directly to assets before lifestyle can absorb it. Not after the money arrives and the new version of something is looking very rational. Before. The decision made before the money exists is executed at roughly 3 times the rate of the decision made in the moment. That's not motivation, that's just how humans handle sequencing under variable reward conditions. None of these change your life this month. All 3 executed consistently over a few years change the architecture of your financial life in ways that no promotion timeline could replicate. The escalator gets you to floor 5, the floor someone else designed for you. Now you know what the deal actually is. If you want to keep thinking about money the way it actually works, subscribing is the move. See you in the next one.